Oh, what up, guys? Pirate Dad here. Boom! Ukraine is still Ukraine. They're holding on real strong. Now, to give you some updates. Troops, Russian troops that is, are pulling out of Kiev and moving east. Same with out of Mariupol. Now, why is that? Well, the truth of the matter is they're getting their shit pushed in. And they're not winning. They're not getting the territory that they thought they'd have had by now. And they're losing lots and lots of troops. Like, I've heard estimates of nearing 20,000 troops. And it's only been like a month and a month and a half, basically? That's insane. Now let's wind back the clock a little bit and give you some history. So, in 1990, when the USSR fell, the average defense expenditure was $300 billion from NATO on armaments and military stuff like that. By 1992, the average defense expenditure dropped to $250 billion. And as we continued into the 90s, it just fell further. We've shifted from spending money on armaments and military in general to agriculture, infrastructure, and schools, modernizing road systems and all of that. Now, by 2000 and Putin coming back into office, Putin then modernized his Russian military and increased expenditure. And so NATO looked at that and was like, that's worrying, but really didn't do too much about it. By the time that it got a little later in time, and Putin started actually attacking places like Chechnya and Georgia, that's when Biden was, not Biden, that's when, actually Biden was in office, but he was a vice president. But that's when Obama was in office, and he made the 2% GDP expenditure NATO rule, meaning that if you were in NATO, you had to spend 2% of your average GDP on military aid, military equipment, whatever. And that was to be able to be in NATO. So they did that, and that helped for a time. It also deterred Russia from, doing some other stuff. Now, as the time goes by, it comes to Trump being in office, and NATO is no longer really upholding their end of the bargain. And so Trump's like, yo, the heck, you gotta spend that 2% average GDP if you even want to be in NATO. And I remember him talking all that, making them do whatever, and it worked for the most part. Now, we have always been able to send stuff to Ukraine ever since 2014, but we didn't spend a lot, and we didn't send a lot. But we did help in a way. One of the big things I remember is a lot of Ukrainian troops were actually going to Canada to be trained in trench warfare tactics and how to use NATO armaments. And it looks like that was for the better. It definitely made a difference because that came to pass. Now, if we go back and look at what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, all the troops, the Russian troops moving out of Kiev and Mariupol, some people are saying that's because of a peace treaty and maybe that Putin is done at this point. But that's not at all the case. Let me tell you. What he's doing is he's moved his troops out of the areas that he's just turned into Stalingrad 2.0, just a meat grinder, losing troops, no progression. And so he's pulled them back, and he's actually shifting the attention to the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donetsk region, where this whole thing started back in 2014. Because he does have the troop capacity to take at least that. And so, in his eyes, if he's lost the major war already, he can at least hopefully take this chunk of Ukraine and maybe in the future move out from there like he did with Crimea. Now, I don't think it's going to work out like that though, because Ukraine is already in full fighting force and they're not going to want that. And since they've already, since they've already gotten all their military into action and everyone's already fighting, they don't have to arm everybody. They're not just going to sit there and let them take it. They're going to just do the same thing and move their troops over to the eastern area and fight. Now, the other issue with that is that, yes, the eastern part of Ukraine is obviously, a little more deadly. I don't know how I'd say it really, but they've been fighting for longer and it's harder for us to get as much aid over to the eastern areas, but we still definitely can. Along with that, troops are moving out of the Chernobyl area, and people are like, oh, is that because of radiation? No. It turns out the radiation is not even that bad. What they're moving out for is because, well, they're not really getting anything done there. They're just kind of sitting there and their troops could be used elsewhere, like the Donetsk region. So the next big battle that you're going to see will be for the Donetsk region. It will be like a replay of 2014. And since we're moving into like the summer, I foresee the war getting even deadlier. And another angle is part of the reason Putin hasn't been as effective as we would think is because his aides actually are not giving him accurate, up-to-date information. He's only getting the, the good side of the war. He's not hearing about all the troop deaths, all the tanks being knocked out, all the supply lines not connecting. And so the fear is that once he does get the accurate information, that he might, overreact. He's already warned about nuclear weapons, about sending in more sophisticated armaments and troops. And it's like, okay, we'll see. I don't really think he's going to nuke anybody because, end of the world. But it will be interesting. I foresee the war moving to the east, to the Donetsk region, as I already said. Hopefully because of that, and there being less civilian populous areas, like there's still plenty of civilians over there, but it's not as many. Maybe that will slow down a bit because the war crimes are getting insane. Like, at the end of this, Putin's gonna have to stand trial internationally somehow because, he's already caused such crazy genocidal stuff. Like, maybe genocidal wasn't the right word, but dude, he's killing so many civilians. It's like scary, and they don't report on it much because of how deadly and sad and scary it is, but go look that shit up yourself. I posted something actually yesterday. Sad, sad, sad situation. But Ukraine holds strong. Last little bit of information I'll give you is because of the Russian troops all being conscripts and not actually being ready for war, they're actually sabotaging some of their stuff. Not all of them, but a good amount are. They're self-sabotaging their tanks, transport trucks, supply lines, and even I've heard that they shot down one of their own planes. God dang. The troops aren't even listening to their higher ups as much anymore because of you get a bunch of conscripts to fight a war that didn't want to fight in the first place, and they're all 18, 17 in that area, really. Morale is the biggest factor in the fighting. The reason that Ukraine is still Ukraine is because of the morale factor. They didn't have a stronger army, but they had a stronger morale, a stronger need to fight. They're fighting for their very existence. Ukraine has been Ukraine for a long time, and they don't want to give it up, and they're not going to give it up. Hold strong, Ukraine. I really do believe that you could win this war at this point. You might have to fight a protracted war for the eastern areas, but we already know you can do that. And now that you got your whole military up and running, just keep pushing. Keep pushing. Because these Russian troops aren't even in the fight no more. They're just being forced. Because they've got a satirical dictator as a leader. Scary situation. Hold strong, Ukraine. You got this.